Welcome, everyone, to History Gone Wilder, part of Half History Will Travel. I'm your host, Wilder historian Dr. Lucas Wilder. And last time, Ulysses S. Grant began moving his army from Cold Harbor to the outskirts of Petersburg. Now I'll cover the battles in mid-June 1864 as Grant attempts a quick capture of the vital city. If you like what I do, please consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't done so already, join the Patreon page, and purchase something from one of my online stores. Every little bit helps. Thank you. 18th Corps Commander William Baldy Smith was outside the Potomac line, the fortifications for Petersburg, by midday on June 15th. The small engagement at Baylor's farm and the part he played in the Overland Campaign taught him that attacking entrenched or even lightly protected enemy forces could result in high casualties. Heavy firing from the Confederate artillery resulted in Smith only doing light skirmishing for most of the afternoon, but he planned to launch an attack around 5 p.m. He called for a heavy skirmish line, a single rank of soldiers only one pace apart as opposed to the normal 5 paces, to attack the Confederate fortifications. Smith believed that if he used a regular battle line, that the rebels would concentrate their fire more heavily, but with a skirmish line, they would be less likely to use artillery to combat the approaching attack. He first wanted to bombard the Confederate position, but his artillery commander sent his horses away to water them, so it took nearly an hour to get the artillery in position to unleash a barrage. It was about 7 p.m. when the first skirmish lines advanced toward the Confederate position. Regiments from the brigades of Newton Curtis and Hiram Burnham made their way across the open ground in the front of the Potomac line. Smith's plan thus far worked great, with the skirmish line overwhelming the light defenders. One Union soldier commented, "You never saw such a crazy crowd of men as those who captured the fort. I attempted the first instant after we got in, and had sent the prisoners to the rear to have my companies form to be ready to receive a Reb charge if they should attempt to retake. But as not either of the other regiments attempted to form, and their men were running all around, I found it next to impossible." With the success from the initial attack, brigades on the Union right advanced, with George Stannard's brigade making it into the works, but Griffin Stedman's brigade got pinned down. Then on the Union left, the African-American troops from Edward Hinks' division drove the rebels away from their fortifications, with the stories of the massacre of Fort Pillow still on their minds. Finally, 2 regiments from Samuel Duncan's brigade and 1 regiment from Edward Wild's brigade attacked on the extreme Union left, throwing back the rebels and helping to fend off some counterattacks. On the Union right, Stannard was ordered to withdraw, but placed the 55th Pennsylvania and 25th Massachusetts in an advanced position. Thus ended the battle for Petersburg in the waning hours of June 15th. Smith has long been criticized for not pushing on to Petersburg. One of his soldiers stated, "Had our men pushed the thing right along, we might have taken the town with small loss. Now it will cost rivers of blood." However, that wasn't the whole story. Pierre Gustave Toutant Beauregard, the commander of Petersburg, was ordering up reinforcements, and by the time Smith could have reorganized his men for a night attack, something already dangerous in the best conditions, sizable reinforcements in the form of Robert Hoke's division was starting to filter into the city. Nevertheless, the Union now had possession of a portion of the Confederate works guarding the city. Throughout the night, the Confederate reinforcements came into Petersburg, swelling Beauregard's numbers. Beauregard even stripped the Howlett line between the James and Appomattox rivers of troops, telling the commander there to leave only a skirmish line. Robert E. Lee, commander of the Army of Northern Virginia, sent troops south, but he hadn't discovered that Ulysses S. Grant was moving the majority of his force south of the James River. Nevertheless, Lee sent George Pickett's division south. On the morning of June 16th, Benjamin Butler's Army of the James attacked the lightly held Confederate position, capturing the rifle pits and the forward works of the enemy. Anticipating the other works to be abandoned or nearly so, more troops burst through the Howlett line, sending the 59th Alabama into a retreat. Some of the Union troops made it all the way to the Richmond and Petersburg Railroad and began to destroy the track, heating up the center of the rails and bending them to prevent further use. So far that morning, it looked as though the Union were poised to capture Petersburg. Through the night, the 2nd and 9th Corps got across the river to help Smith, as well as the 5th Corps, which came a little later. Winfield Scott Hancock, commander of the 2nd Corps, was still suffering from his wound he received at Gettysburg nearly 1 year before. Hancock, known as Hancock the Superb, was known as an aggressive commander, helping save the day at Gettysburg on July 2nd by dispatching troops from his own corps to the Union left around the wheat field. He wasn't as aggressive in the Wilderness the previous month, but his corps saw some of the hardest fighting at Spotsylvania Courthouse at the Muleshoe salient. Along with Butler's attack at the Hallett Line, the morning of June 16th saw Hancock order two of his divisions, one under David Birney and one under John Gibbon, to attack the Confederate position at or before daylight, but his subordinates wouldn't get their attack started until 8 a.m., when Thomas Egan's brigade stepped forward to probe the enemy line. Egan wasn't respected by the soldiers in his brigade, with one soldier calling Egan a third-rate idiot. Egan's first charge failed, but the second charge captured a secondary line, but nothing else. Egan was wounded in the attack. One of his men commented, "With astonishing complacency, we watched him dragged to the rear. If any tears were shed, they were tears of joy mingled with the hope that his wound would keep him away till our term ends." By this point, Grant was at the front, and in the absence of the commander of the Army of the Potomac, Grant placed Hancock in command of the field. After reconnoitering the ground, Grant began to ride back to City Point after telling both Smith and Hancock he wanted an attack to commence at 6 p.m. Halfway to City Point, Grant encountered the Army commander George Meade, gave him operational command at the front, and told him that he wished an attack at 6 p.m. Meanwhile, Governor K. Warren's 5th Corps was also making their way across the river. Once across, the order came to bathe in the river. 5,000 men at one time moved into the water. One soldier described their tactics as to getting clean. "We did not take our clothes off, but soaped them on our bodies and swam around to work out the grime, giving them an occasional rubbing. Then applied more soap and went through the same process again, until satisfied that we had about as much dirt off as it was safe to take at one time." Meade convened with Hancock about the assault ordered for 6 p.m. and identified a few locations to attempt to penetrate the rebel line. Hancock's 2nd Corps and Ambrose Burnside's 9th Corps would make the attack, supporting one another in the assault, while Smith on the right and cavalry on the left made demonstrations to pin down the Confederates. Unbeknownst to Meade, events north of his position were transpiring against the Union efforts. Earlier that morning, Butler captured the Hallett Line, but now George Pickett's division was advancing on the Federals in that sector. Pickett's lead brigade under Eppa Hunton encountered the Federals first and pushed back the enemy skirmishers. Soon Montgomery Corse's brigade came up beside of Hunton, and together they pushed back the enemy and recaptured the Confederate works. By sunset, Pickett and the division of Charles Field from Richard Anderson's corps restored the Confederate Hallett Line. In Meade's front, the assault planned for 6 p.m. began a little after that hour, with the 2nd Corps taking the brunt of the attack. Smith's men advanced but didn't capture any new works, but Hancock's troops were able to secure a few more sections of the Dimmock Line. Try as he might, Beauregard was unable to retake the position. In the attack, Francis Barlow lost one of his bravest brigade commanders, Patrick Kelly, the leader of the Irish Brigade. Kelly was born in Ireland and immigrated to the United States. When the war broke out, he joined the 69th New York Infantry and worked his way up the ranks to eventually command the Irish Brigade by 1863. He even led the Irish Brigade in its destructive charge at Gettysburg on July 2nd. The Union Army was getting closer to Petersburg, and at 10 p.m. began firing shots into the city for the first time. One South Carolinian wrote, "The Yankees opened on the city without any warning and shelled it all night. The city is full of women and children and wounded men. Is this not barbarous?" Union ambulance wagons scoured the battlefield searching for the wounded of the 2,500 casualties produced in the attacks, the majority of them sustained by the 2nd Corps. That night, more Union and Confederate troops converged on Petersburg and its outskirts, signaling that more combat would ensue the next day.